Welcome to the Ultimate Farm Wife podcast. On this channel, we're going to be discussing all things marrying a farmer, moving to the land, and becoming integrated with a family farming operation. Whether you're moving to the farm for the first time or whether you're moving back into a family farming operation, we discuss the ins and the outs of all of it. So let's jump into today's episode. Welcome to the farm. Today we're talking So You've Married Our Farmer, Now What? Our guest. Natasha, please introduce yourself, your family, and your farm.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. So my name's Natasha Yarrington. Myself and my husband run a dairy farm on the mid-north coast of New South Wales. We have 4 children who are aged 9 to 15. That's probably about it to start with.
Natasha, how did you meet your husband? And then what was it like moving to the farm for the first time?
Yeah, so I grew up locally on a dairy farm not too far from where my husband's farm is, and just, kind of met him through, being a farmer. Moving to the farm for the first time. So I was working full-time for my parents on their dairy farm, and we fell pregnant, and I worked full-time up until I was about 32 weeks pregnant. And so because I was working for mum and dad and still doing early mornings and stuff, I was just kind of like in between hubby's place and home with mum and dad. So I kind of wasn't, officially living here. So I didn't move in until I stopped full-time work. Very pregnant. And it was a fairly big adjustment because I'd gone from, working full-time, being fairly independent to moving in with him, being financially independent, and moving in with him. And then all of a sudden kind of having to rely on him, I suppose, in a lot of ways. I was still working part-time for mum and dad, like the last bit of my pregnancy. And then even after our eldest was born, I was still doing a bit of part-time work for mum and dad. So I was still, going out there and stuff. There was a lot of adjusting in that first phase, I suppose. And then obviously, becoming a mum for the first time and just kind of trying to find my place on his family farm was quite challenging in those early days.
Yes, I can imagine it is for many of us when we marry our farmer and move to the land. So, Natasha, can you tell me what some of those challenges were? You've mentioned going from being financially and personally independent to then relying on your husband and the farm. Were there other hurdles as well?
Yeah, the biggest hurdle, I suppose, was my in-laws and especially my mother-in-law. There's been a lot that has gone on in the last 18 years since my husband and I have been together. And I've had to do a lot of work on myself and my relationship with my husband and my in-laws and stuff. My father-in-law passed away about 4 years ago, and not long after that, we had to put my mother-in-law into a nursing home. She's got severe dementia. And so looking back, a lot of the issues that we had with her probably stemmed from early onset dementia, but we didn't know it at the time. And, I say all of this now, I'm not coming from a negative place anymore. I feel like I've worked through a lot of it. It was quite a challenge. Just all I wasn't part of the business back then. It was a 3-way partnership between my husband and both his parents. And as a way to kind of make me feel more included, I suppose, my husband had the great idea that, I could start doing the books. There was just such, a lot from my mother-in-law. And then just little things all the time, the things that were said, like as far as my husband and I are concerned, we've always been a team between the farm and the kids and everything that needs to be done. And so if that meant that he would come home from breakfast after milking of a morning and he might hang a load of washing on the line or, whatever it might be. And I might have been up to the dairy to help that morning, or I might have been going to get on the tractor or, whatever. And there would just always be comments from his mum about why are you hanging the washing on the line? And that's her job, and she shouldn't be on the farm. It's not her farm. I would, put a photo on Facebook, and it would get back to her that, I'd put a photo up calling it my farm, and just all this real nitpicking stuff. And when you're a young mum, I was 19 when I had our eldest daughter, and, you've uprooted your whole life for this man that you love, and move in. It's a lot to deal with, and it's a lot for your relationship. There was lots of things that were quite strained, and so yeah, that was the biggest challenge for me to overcome. And it's only really been in the last 4 years since my father-in-law passed away and that she's gone into the nursing home that I actually somewhat feel content on the farm now. I don't feel like someone's looking over my shoulder all the time, which is certainly how I always felt, and physically and mentally, because where their house is looks over to the dairy. So anytime I would be at the dairy with the kids or whatever, she'd be out looking, and then, there'd be things said, and just that feeling of, just being watched all the time, I suppose, and critiqued, and what was that done for, and why did that happen, and that sort of thing. That was probably the biggest challenge. It certainly, like I said, made it not super difficult, but there was obviously things between my husband and I that we had to work through because, like most sons in that situation, they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. They're trying to keep their wife happy, but they're also trying to keep the peace. And so that's kind of what it was always. So there was the challenge there, and just making sure that we were still okay and working through all of that. So it's been a long journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And just the mental and physical load of that does take a toll on yourself and your family as well. And really glad that you also mentioned, like, it's not as easy as your husband just standing up for you, because it is his parents and it is his family. And it is his legacy, the farm, whether that is the dairy farm you find yourself on or other farms. And it is quite a common thread to hear in family farming businesses as well. So I'm sorry that you had to endure that. And you've mentioned a few times you've done a lot of work on unpacking that. So can you tell me a little bit about how you did that and how you did continue moving forward? Because you've been on the farm 15, this is nearly 16 years now, and it's only really recently changed in the last 4 or so. So how did you unpack that, and how did you move forward as a team to make sure that you were able to come out the other side?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I did seek some professional help back in the early days, because, there was that feeling of when someone, puts that on you all the time and critiques you so much, there's a lot of mental stuff in that. And so I got to the point that it's me, it's my fault, I'm the problem, I need to change, I need to do this. And so going and seeking some professional help was really reassuring that actually it wasn't me, and that there was nothing wrong with me. And I think too, just staying connected and making sure that you've got a good circle of friends around you. I'm sure many of my friends over the years are probably sick and tired of hearing the latest story about my mother-in-law, because that's what it always was, like, oh, this is what's happened now. Just so many things. Like our third child was born in September, and she didn't make any effort to come down and meet him until she didn't meet him until Christmas time that year. And you mentioned it before, like, I know that I'm not alone in sharing these stories. And I really, to be honest, if I had heard some of these stories when I was going through this, I think it would have made me feel so much less alone. And so I guess that's why I want to be really open and honest about it now. And like I said, I don't come from a place of like negative anymore, like I have worked through that. Certainly seeking some professional help, really being open and honest, and really communicating really well with my husband, and making sure that he was fully aware of, what I was feeling and how those things that she had said made me feel, and how it was portrayed, and all those sorts of things. And even for our children, because there were things that it got to the point that things were being said in front of our kids, and that sort of thing. And so you're then stuck in this really hard place of you're trying to, again, keep the peace and keep everybody happy, but also I didn't want my kids, hearing those things. There is absolutely no reason that someone should speak poorly about a child's mother to them. And so that was the absolute deal breaker for me, I suppose. And so then when that started happening and I just completely removed my kids from that situation, and I was like, well, she's not having any contact with the kids unless I'm there, because I can't trust what she's going to say when I'm not there. And so then from her perspective, that was portrayed, and she was happily telling everybody that I'd taken the kids away from her and that I wasn't letting her see the kids and all this sort of stuff. And so then dealing with that layer of complexity of, you know, you think you're doing the right thing for your kids and for you, but then for that still to like come back at you, I suppose. I felt like I could never do anything right. I think that's what it come down to. There was nothing I could ever do that was right. If I went to the dairy or I helped on the farm, I shouldn't have been there. If I didn't, then Rod was working too hard and I should have helped him. Like, there was just nothing that I could ever do that was right. And so I think very early on I learnt that, and I got to the point where I was like, stuff it. I'm just going to do what keeps me and my kids and my family unit happy. So I think the realization of that, and like I said, being really open and communicating really well with my husband as to what I was feeling, how I was struggling. He certainly had, you know, a few conversations with her, but it was always, you know, it's just the typical, I think kind of gaslighting and narcissism has really come about in the last few years. And those are words that I probably didn't know about, you know, 15 years ago when all this started, but I think that's absolutely what it was. And it was always our fault, not hers. And then, you know, we would open the doors and be like, okay, well, we really want you to come, you know, we want you to come see the kids. So how about you come to us for Christmas? Or how about we do this? Or, you know, we really tried. And I think that was the thing for me too. I wanted to know that, you know, because my kids were quite little back then, quite young. And I think that I wanted to know that when we got to the point, which, you know, we are at that point now, where my kids are old enough to ask, how come we never had a relationship with Nana? I wanted to honestly say to them that I tried everything that I could, and without being negative or without blaming, it was on her side that the problem lied. And so I think once I got to that point, I was happy and settled within myself that I'd done everything that I could. And it was no longer for me to try. So, sorry, that's not really an answer as to getting through all that. But yeah, I certainly think like seek professional help when you need to. Be really open and honest with communication with your husband. And it's a lot of internal work. And whether that's professionally or, you know, in this day and age, like, you know, listening to different podcasts and all those sorts of things to get that that help, that self-help type thing.
Yeah, I think it's really important within that situation, as you've highlighted and as your journey shows, like you've really got to work out what the issue is. And if you haven't been exposed to behaviour like that before, whether it's through narcissism or whether it's through dementia, it really does throw you. And it really shows you definitely, in those situations, you can't do anything that's perceived to be right. So really loved hearing that you did get professional help and that you did sit back with your husband and talk about, you know, your values and that you're a team and how to work through that, because I think there's a lot of families who I've spoken to who have not been able to do that, and it does either end in the farm falling apart or the separation of marriage. And that is always hard when you do love that person and you want to stay with them. So I'm really glad that you were able to identify what it was, work through it, keep the communication going. That is just so important, so important. So I know that a lot of other rural wives, farmers and farmers' wives that I've spoken to on the podcast, whether they've said it out loud on live or they've spoken to me about it off camera, when we're not recording, it is actually very common, as you've said, Natasha. And if we had spoken about this openly and what we can do to move forward, it is so important to do that. So thank you for openly speaking about that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think I've been saying this for the last few years. I feel that succession is probably single-handedly one of the biggest threat to Australian agricultural family businesses, because you're exactly right. Either the marriage breaks down or the family business breaks down, because essentially in the end, the son, or I mean, I don't want to gender assume, like it could be the opposite, that it's the daughter on the farm and it's a son-in-law. But that in-law, the person who's the family farm has to choose essentially between the farm and the parents or the wife, unless they can work some sort of communication thing out. And you see it all the time, and I completely agree. And same, I talk to many women in my situation on family farms and that sort of thing. And absolutely, like I said, I think it's probably one of the biggest threats to Australian family farms. And yeah, we do need to talk about it more and be more open and honest about it, and how, as a community, we can get through it and really support each other and stuff.
I am really excited to share with you this episode's sponsor, Sarah Steele Conveyancing. You may remember Sarah from season 4, episode 2, back when we were called The Rural Mum. My conversation with Sarah in that interview shared a lot of insights into her 10 years of being on the farm, from moving there initially from town to dealing with emergencies, operating unreliable machinery, keeping up to date with what's going on the farm, adjusting to the evolving family as they grew and the kids become older. And Sarah emphasizes the significance of not having all the answers, embracing the learning experience, but also being prepared, and what that meant for her and her family in emergency situations on farm. I will link Sarah's interview in the show notes below, so be sure to go back and listen. But let's talk about her business. Sarah, you talk about a lot of flexibility and how important it is to your business. Tell us about that.
9 to 5 is something that most of us have to work. So how do you get your personal things done? By contacting Sarah Steele Conveyancing, you can call me, text me or email me outside of these hours, and more often than not, I'm more than happy to talk. I get the benefit of time with my family during daylight hours, and you get the benefit of my time and professional services outside of 9 to 5 and on Saturdays and Sundays.
Efficiency is important to you at Sarah Steele Conveyancing. Tell us why that is.
I know when I choose that I need to do something, yesterday is the time that I want it done, and I take that same approach into my clients' matters. Time is very important, and getting your matter from start to finish as efficiently as I can is my number one.
Sarah, why is being local so important when you're choosing a conveyancer?
When you work in the Central West, you know the things to look for that aren't disclosed in a contract. That can make a big difference to a client at the end of the day, knowing all the things about a property, even when they're not disclosed in the contract for you.
Sarah, what sets you apart from other conveyancers?
Setting up this business, the client's needs have always been number one. I often think about what I want from professional services and try and develop these policies into the business's approach.
What made you want to start Sarah Steele Conveyancing?
I opened Sarah Steele Conveyancing as I wanted a business that would take a client from start to finish, using me alone, and that way we could develop a plan that was started on day one and that was seen through right until the very end, settlement day.
You have a very distinct method. How does that help people who are using you?
From our first contact, we will make a plan that is unique to you and I. We will see this plan through, right through to settlement, and you will benefit from my professional skills and services from start to finish.
If you would like to find out more about how Sarah Steele Conveyancing can help you, please check out her links in the show notes below. And after listening to this episode, don't forget to go back and watch Sarah's interview, Season 4, Episode 2, which is also linked in the show notes below. Now let's get back into today's episode. So did you it doesn't sound like you ended up starting with the books. It does sound like you took a more hands-on approach, because taking on the books in a family farming business is massive in itself. So was that something that was too hard to reach to start with, or where did you start on the farm?
Yeah, so I probably started way back in those early days. Like I mentioned, I was still working full-time for mum and dad up until I was fairly heavily pregnant. And so then when I stopped working, I was obviously very pregnant, and I couldn't do a great deal. But I was just kind of like the rouseabout, I suppose. I just kind of run around on the farm and do what I could. I thought coming from, I came from a dairy, and I thought, I don't think I thought I knew it all, but I thought I knew a lot. But certainly,
so
as I've learned,
one dairy, and then that's the two businesses.
Yes.
So one dairy to another dairy, and you found that both businesses ran so differently.
It was more just that, growing up on a farm, and then, moving to a farm, I was like, oh, it's fine. I know what it's like to live on a farm, and I know what it's like to, be on tank water, or, all those sorts of things that come with rural living. But it's very different being the adult on a farm rather than the child on a farm. And so I think there was a lot of growth and a lot of growing up from me in those first few years. So in those early days, I was just kind of, following Rod around and, just kind of doing little bits here and there. Like I've mentioned, I was always made to feel like I wasn't welcome on the farm. So there was always that in the back of my mind as well as to how much I was on the farm. When our eldest Lexi was born, I would just bundle her up in the ute, or chuck her on the tractor with me, or I'd baby wear her while I was milking or whatever, and just kind of still get on with life, I suppose. And I went back, I was, working part-time for mum and dad on their farm. So I still had that as well, which was really good for me to just kind of have that bit of separation. Yeah, and then I suppose as time went on and we had more kids, it certainly got a bit harder to be on the farm, with 2 and 3 and 4 kids. You just kind of got to adjust as each baby comes along, and just, trying to really find my place, I suppose, and just where I was welcomed or what I could do, or, that sort of thing. I think I took on the books probably when our second was born. And so I'd done them for a little while, and then I can't remember exactly, but there was something that happened, and my mother-in-law declared, she wanted full control back. And so she took it all back again. And then probably 6 or 12 months later, we started getting calls from businesses that we were purchasing stuff through saying that the bills hadn't been paid for 3 months and this sort of stuff. And so then, and that was when it was very evident that her dementia was really ramping up, or she was really declining. And so, we kind of stepped in and took over. And then, it's just been a gradual process, I suppose, of just doing more and more until the point of doing it all. So, and I think the same with kind of the physical work on the farm. Like I said, I was just kind of doing bits here and there in the beginning, and then just kind of taking more on as the kids kind of got older, or as I felt more comfortable, I suppose.
Yeah. So I do want to go back just a little bit. What did those conversations and action plans look like when you were getting those calls about owing money and the books weren't getting done? I'm sure it didn't just look like marching into the house and taking some of the documents and things like that. So what were the conversations between you and your husband and his parents that was like, okay, this is becoming an issue. How are we going to go forward on this?
Yeah, I think certainly the conversation with his parents was when I was not there, because I think that would have escalated the situation a lot more. So, from memory, Rod went up there and said, look, I think it's best if we take it all back on. And I think he probably told his parents that he would be the one overseeing it, he would be the one doing it, whereas, that certainly wasn't the case. Yeah, so, I don't really know what her issue was, I suppose, because the way the business was set up, that's back in the days when most things were still being paid by cheque, and the cheque needed 2 signatories, and it needed to be Rod and one of his parents. So Rod didn't have control anyways. He couldn't go and, buy a new tractor without them knowing about it. They were still part of the business and stuff. And so that was, I suppose, a lot of frustration on our side, that it's not like we're trying to run this business into the ground, or it's not like we're going to do the wrong thing, because you still have control of it. we renegotiated our commercial loan with the bank at one point, and maybe 8 years ago. And so at that stage, it was still Rod and his mum and his dad. And the bank manager met his mum, or like he kind of knew his mum, and saw her again, and he could pick up that her dementia was declining. And he said, I'm not comfortable with her as part of the business. So that was actually a really good point of like, okay, well, we actually need to change this. And so she was then taken out of the business at that point. And I don't think we would have got his dad over the line unless it was an external person saying, I'm not going to do that. And it was a matter of like, if we can't, renegotiate our loan, the bank's not going to, keep our loan going, then we have to sell up and stop. So I think that was like a wake-up call for his dad to be like, okay, well, yeah, we need to kind of sort this out. And look, I wasn't there. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall when that conversation happened, that she was being told that she was, being taken out of the business. But to be honest, I don't even know whether the stage of dementia she was at, that she would have even really fully understood it anyways. So, yeah, did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did. Okay. So when you took on the books, so that was about 8 years ago.
I mean, it's really, I feel like the last, 15 years have really almost meshed into one. So yeah, probably, around 8 years ago.
Yeah. So it sounds like the business structure itself has changed a lot in 8 years, and your skills and your involvement in the farm has changed a lot, particularly in the last 4. So what did the changes look like for the family farm in the last 8 years?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, Rod's mum was taken out of the partnership, so then it was just his dad and my husband and Rod. And so then when his father passed away 4 years ago, that again was probably the other biggest challenge that we've had to overcome, because as anyone knows, it's been through an estate and the will and all of that. When someone passes in a family business, and especially an agricultural business, there's a lot of layers of complexity for us. And there was a will in place. However, we'd had a family meeting about 12 months prior, and the decision was that we weren't going to run with that will, and we had something else in place. And even though that's what was agreed on, it was never actually formally signed off on. So we had to kind of end up going through a 2-step process with the will, where the first will had to, legally be done, and then this family deed of agreement had to come in under that. So yeah, lots of layers of complexity in dealing with that. And so, you can't continue a partnership with only one person. So once Rod's dad had passed away, I stepped in. So the business is now running as a partnership between Rod and myself. So yeah, there has been a lot of changes over the years, and especially the last 8 years, and juggling all of that. And like I said, yeah, obviously the will and the estate in there as well has, I feel like I should have gone and done a legal course or, something, because it was me dealing with it all the time. And I think we ended up going through 2 different lawyers, because the first one just couldn't wrap his head around just the layers of complexity and stuff. And even the second one, it was like I was forever going, no, you've got this wrong. It's not that, it's this parcel of land, or it's this, or it's that, because Rod's parents still, up until the day that his father died, had a partnership themselves with a few beef cattle. So that was separate to the dairy business. And there was just so many layers of complexity that it was just, it was difficult to muddle through all the legal side of that, I suppose. And yeah, so that in itself has been a huge challenge. But I think just in terms of kind of the financial side, and I mean, in the beginning it was just kind of paying bills and just, money in, money out, I suppose. Whereas now I see myself more as the full financial manager and really budgeting things. For us as dairy farmers, we get monthly pays. So all the milk that we send for a calendar month, we get paid on about the 15th of the following month. So, we're a lot more cash flow than than a lot of other agricultural businesses. But yeah, there's lots of budgeting around that, and just so I feel like I've finally in a position where I've got a really good overview of the business and where we're at and the financial side of things and that sort of thing. So, which is not something I can remember when I was 12, 13 with my dad. I would sit and help him write the checks out and fill out his cash book and stuff like that. So I've always had an interest in that side of things. And I suppose it's just evolved over time. We're really lucky in dairying as well that we have Dairy Australia, which is our industry levy body, and they provide lots of education and support for us as farmers. And I've done a few financial courses through them as well. So, really been in a position to kind of upskill myself and, like I said, kind of actually feel like I somewhat know what I'm doing now.
Yeah, absolutely. So 4 years ago, you and Rodney joined into your own partnership together. You took on ownership of the farm and the books as a whole. So were there any main changes that you made to the family business that really pushed it forward into your generation and potentially into your kids' generation?
I think even the last few years of like when Rod's dad was still here, there were things that we were doing, really adapting technology and stuff. Like 6 months before his dad passed away, we put cow collars on all our cows, the whole herd, all the heifers, all the dry cows have them. So they're rumination collars, so we can track their rumination, their heats, their health, all that sort of stuff. So that was a pretty big investment, and from a financial side, but also felt like a really big step forward. Probably kind of those last 4 to 6 years before his dad passed, there was still, like when I was kind of doing the books, there was, when I was doing the books, I should say, I wasn't kind of doing them, I was doing them, but there was still a lot of, we'd buy a load of hay and his dad would be like, oh, how can we afford that? And it just used to give me the shit so much, because I'm like, you've got no idea what's in the bank account. You've got no idea. And because, a week earlier, I might have made the remark that, we can't buy XYZ this month, we'll buy it next month or whatever. But I'd already budgeted in the load of hay or, whatever it is. And there was just, it really, and to be honest, Rod sometimes does it where, when you don't have a full overview of what is going on and the whole thing, and you just 5%, you see something or oh, what's that? And it's like, you don't even know the whole picture. You can't make a judgment call when you don't know the whole picture. So, even though there was all those comments, we were certainly, like Rod and I were making, all the, like most of the decisions and stuff. And so, I feel like, just a few of those decisions, I suppose, just really trying to move our business forward, and really set it up for our kids if that's what they want. The farm, my husband, the family farm that we're on, my husband's 6th generation, so our kids are 7th generation. So his family were the first to settle this property, which is pretty special, but also comes with a lot of, responsibility. It's the generational blessing and curse, I suppose. And we would never, force our kids or encourage them either way. It's completely up to them to decide. But at the end of the day, we want to, we just see ourselves as custodians of the land for our generation and our time here. And we want to make sure that we do the best to our ability to farm it and to keep it, and to set it up the best that we can, that should any of our children decide to take it on, that, it's good for them to go type thing. So I suppose, every decision that we make in our business and moving forward and stuff is for our kids.
If you're enjoying listening along with us today and learning some tips, tricks, and advice, then please like, subscribe, and even share this interview with someone who you think would need to hear this information or who might benefit from other interviews done right here on this channel. Now let's get back into today's episode. Yeah, absolutely. Natasha, you mentioned that you moved to the collar system. Now, from what I've read and know about the collar system is that it is a game changer when it comes to paperwork and really streamlining agricultural processes. Like I know on our farm, we have stud shorthorns. So I know that when I sit down to do the bookwork, like I've got a breeding book and I've got a mating book and I've got a calving book and I've got all of that. Do the collars sync that? Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So 100% before the collars, I had an AI book, a dry off book, a calving book, and a cow would calve, and I'd go to the dairy and I'd fill out, the dry off book, I'd tick that she'd calved and fill out the calving book and, obviously what the calf was and all that sort of stuff. Whereas now I can do it on the app on my phone if I'm in the paddock and the cow's, just calved, and I'm like, sweet, I'll just do this straight away. Or I can do it, on the computer at the dairy, and absolutely, it just streamlines everything. I do still keep a calving book, which is old and dodgy as, but I like it because unless there is a way on the system, I don't know. But for me to go, how many calves do we have out of that sire? We AI everything and, use, lots of different bulls and stuff. So if I'm like, how many calves have we got out of that? Or it's just easier to look on a list rather than go through the computer. So it absolutely does streamline things. And certainly with sick cows as well, it'll pick up, that their rumination is down before you physically can see that there's something not quite right. I don't know how many cows we would have saved by jumping in and, doing something earlier because the system's picked up that there's something not quite right. Same with mastitis, not that we don't get a lot of mastitis, but it will pick up, again, their rumination drop, and it'll pick up signs of mastitis before there's anything physically there. So it's great for that. And certainly, calving and distress and that sort of stuff as well. But then, the paperwork side of things, it's a lot easier. And so I should actually, probably mention that, that's probably where I started way back. My husband and his father have never been cow people. They're grass growers, and my husband's a mechanic by trade, so he'll happily be out on his tractor or fixing something in the shed, whereas I came from a very strong herd health cattle background. So in those early days, it was me, cow would calve and it was me filling in the book and that sort of thing. And I suppose in a, silly small way, that made me feel somewhat part of the farm. And that was something that my mother-in-law had no idea about. I don't even know that she would have known it was me writing in those books because, they were just at the dairy. But that was, for me, something for me to take a bit of ownership on, I suppose, and, start to lay my roots down, I suppose, and really, start to do something. So, but no, the collars definitely have taken a lot of the bookwork out of that sort of stuff. And even down to when I'm doing stud registrations and stuff, it's just so much easier now because I can do it all on the computer. And, it's just easier to look at. I can bring the cow number up and her tattoo and everything, and it's so much more streamlined. It definitely is a lot easier.
And I was disappointed that the Sydney Royal Easter Show has the beef cattle section, before the dairy section. So the beef have got to get out so the dairy can come into the Royal. So we didn't get to catch up at the Sydney Royal. But tell me more about your stud herd and where they were when you first got to the farm and where they are now.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, my husband's never been a cow person. So when we first got together, the herd was an absolute all sorts mixed bag. He had every breed, and they were, just crossbreds, and it was kind of bull of the day who he would select. A lot of the time there was a bull running in the herd, and it was just about just having numbers and just having cows. They were all just cows. I came from a stud Jersey and commercial Holstein herd. So, and just before I fell pregnant with our eldest, I bought a couple of my own Jerseys and had my own stud. And so, for me, again, that was just kind of something, that I could have. They were never here on this. Well, in the end, they were here on this farm, but they were always at mum and dad's because Rod was like, I don't want to milk Jersey. So he had a few brown Swiss that they'd started to crossbreed with, and I fell in love with them. Mum and dad had a few in the last few years when they were still dairying and I was still there and stuff. I just absolutely loved them. And that was kind of always our goal to, get back to kind of start a stud. So in 2016, an opportunity came up. There was a fairly big brown Swiss herd dispersal sale out at Narromine. So we went out there and bought, I think we bought 8, and the stud has always been mine and Rod's. So we really, even with our stud name, like we wanted something that reflected us, not the farm, because, just kind of in the back of our mind, if anything wasn't going to work out or we were going to go somewhere, whatever was going to happen, that the stud cows were always ours. So our stud name is Urona Park. So YA for Yarrington, and then RO for Rod, and NA for Natasha. So it's the first 2 letters of like Rod and Natasha Yarrington. And so, yeah, we started off with 8 stud cows that we'd bought, and then it's just grown from there. Not everything in the herd currently, like we're still not at the point where we're fully stud. So we milk about 120 all year round, and we're probably at about half is stud, maybe a little bit more. All of the calves that we're keeping now, all of our heifer replacement calves are all stud. So, yeah, just really concentrating on keeping those. And we just don't really mate any of our commercial cows. They just get mated to beef. And, so we're really increasing our numbers, which is really nice. And, yeah, it's really exciting to see, what we started with 8 years ago and where we are now, and just really starting to see the return on investment and that sort of thing. We've shown at Sydney for the last 3 years with a big team. Before that, obviously, there was a couple of years with COVID there. And then before that, we'd just shown heifers. So the last 3 years, we've shown milkers and heifers. Last year, we were, really pleased. We won Senior Brown Swiss Champion, which was really cool. And then this year, we won Intermediate Brown Swiss. That was really cool. And the one that we won with this year was one that we'd bred. So the one we won with last year, we'd bought her as a heifer. And then, the one we won with this year was one that we'd bred. So to have an animal win in your stud name, it was our second eldest, who's 14, leading her and, getting tapped out for champion. It's pretty special. A lot of the times that's what gets me out of bed of a morning, is just going and, I really love the cattle side of things and, just how special these girls are. And that's kind of what keeps me going, and knowing those breeding improvements and seeing the heifers come through. And just every year I keep thinking, gosh, our heifers are just getting better and better every year. And I guess as a stud breeder or even a commercial breeder, like that's just what you really want, right? That, you're just improving your genetics all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's been a whirlwind of a ride so far, Natasha, from when you first moved in with Rod to where you are now. So was there any particular advice that was given to you when you first moved to the farm, or was there any advice that you would give to other people who are in the same boat? They've married their farmer, they've moved to the land, and now what?
I don't think I was given any advice. Probably from my mum, probably saying don't do it, because, she was a daughter-in-law at one time as well, and married a farmer and moved to the farm. So she'd been through it all before me. I suppose my advice would be to, just make sure that you really communicate with your husband and make sure that you're on the same page. I mean, you don't have to be on the same page all the time, but that you can really communicate and be really open and honest with him about where you're at. And I don't know, maybe kind of having, defined roles a bit more on the farm in terms of what your role is. I think that's something that I struggled with for so long. It was like, well, what am I, or where do I fit, or what's my place? And again, it's only really been the last few years that I feel like I've really found that. So again, I suppose, that's sometimes just a natural thing that happens, and the flip side of that is that you don't want to be the daughter-in-law, move to the farm and suddenly come, guns blaring, we want to do this, we need to do this, I want that, because that can often, make things really tricky as well. So I don't know, I suppose it's just about treading carefully and but treading carefully, but not diminishing your own beliefs or your own, does that make sense? I think still standing up for yourself is really important, but it's just finding that balance between standing up for yourself and not making it look like, or not making it seem like you're just coming in and trying to change everything.
Yeah. And I think from what you were saying earlier on in the in our chat, I think as well, like I wrote down, don't allow yourself to be boxed in by other people's expectations. Like, you know who you are, and you know what you can bring and the skills that you have. So I love that, you can tune out the background noise and try and tune out some of the criticism, which is easier said than done. But definitely, yeah, don't box you in by other people's expectations or thoughts or what they say, because they're never going to be happy. So as long as you're happy with yourself and your team and your partner, then that really will resonate through the rest of your journey and make things a little bit easier. So that's what I wrote down from earlier.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So Natasha, was there anything else that you wanted to mention to the Ultimate Farm Wife listeners about marrying a farmer and moving to land or moving into that family farming environment?
Yeah, I think, and some of the questions that you sent through, which was really good and a really good way for me to reflect and to think, and not only for me, but for my husband as well, because we've had quite a few chats about it. So it's been really good. But yeah, one of the questions about like top tips for surviving or thriving in a drought and again in a wet season. And I know that they're completely opposite ends of the spectrum, but for me, I think the coping mechanisms are the same through them. I think the biggest thing, and this was something that, I was told a lot with little kids, is like, this too shall pass, like nothing lasts forever. And just remembering that. Really staying in your circle of control, or knowing what your circle of control is, and just really, I suppose, staying in that and understanding that it's really easy to get so caught up on what the weather's doing. And even at the moment, we're having an incredibly wet season. Ever since we got home from Sydney show, it has just feels like has not stopped raining, and it's really wet. I got to the point last week where I could finally ride my two-wheeler around the farm and not get bogged every 5 seconds. And I was out of my gumboots. I absolutely hate gumboots. I was out of the gumboots and I was back into my little boots, and we had 3 inches of rain over the weekend. And like, just instantly, I felt like it put me in a bad mood. And I was just like, ugh, like, it's just, when rain comes when you don't need it, or it's not the right time, it's really frustrating, as we all know, because we rely on it so much. But I think the biggest thing is kind of really just like acknowledging that you can't control it. And so just working on what is in your circle of control, staying really connected with other farmers, or certainly other people that get it. I know, we all have different friends for different reasons. And, a lot of my, townie friends are great, beautiful friends, but, just sometimes just don't get it. So making sure that you've got those connections of people that do get it, that you really can just connect with, and that they understand it. For me, when I'm working on the farm, especially when it's those really crappy days, I mostly have my AirPods in and I'm listening to music, dancing around like a stupid idiot and singing away. But for me, that's just, my way to cope type thing. So I don't think it matters whether it's, a drought or a wet season. Both are incredibly challenging in their own ways, and just finding those ways of getting through that, I suppose. And just, the other big thing I think is really trying to leave the farm issues at the farm. And I know that's really hard when most of us live on farm. And I remember hearing a story years ago about an old farmer that there was a tree and he would call it his worry tree. And before he walked in every night, he would put his hand on the tree, just take a moment to leave everything there, because I strongly believe that the most important thing that we all raise on our farms, doesn't matter what ag enterprise you're in, the most important thing you're raising is your children. And it's really, really hard to separate that. And especially when it's a drought or it's a wet season, or, you've lost one too many calves this week, or whatever it is, it's really hard to separate that. And I've kind of adopted that on those really crappy days when I walk in at 6 o'clock at night, and especially in winter, and it's dark and I'm wet and I'm cold and it's been a really crappy milking. There's not a tree, but there's just a post as I walk up onto the veranda of our house. And that's just kind of sometimes just take a few minutes to just stop for a minute before I walk into the home environment, because the kids don't need that. It is really hard to separate the struggles of farming, you know, from your home life. When we were in the drought in 2019, Jack, who's our third, would have only been, I don't know, 6, 7 at the time. And we'd had a little bit of rain, but it wasn't much. And I went to check the rain gauge and it was like nearly full. I was like, why is there so much water in here? I said to the kids, have you been playing outside? And then poor little Jack starts, you know, crying, bursts into tears. And he's like, I thought that if I put more water in there, that would mean that the grass would grow and that everything would be better. And it just, I know I'm tearing up now. Like, I think it is really hard to separate that. And to be honest, I thought that we were doing a good job of separating our life, you know, the struggles and just how bad things were for the kids. But obviously they pick up on so much. And I think that, yeah, that's probably the biggest thing, is to, you know, talk to your husband, not at the dinner table, about how was the day or what happened today or whatever it is, to really try and separate that bit more and do it away from the kids. Rod and I have a team meeting, which is just him and I, because it's just us, every Sunday morning, where we usually take our coffee and hot chocolate. We go sit in the shed away from the kids. We plan out our week. We talk budgeting stuff. We talk about where we're at. We kind of debrief a bit, I suppose, about the week that was and you know, talk about the week coming, and yeah, do that away from the kids, because it's as much as farm life is great and there's so many life lessons to learn and all of that for our kids, I think it is just still really important to keep that separate. So yeah, I think that's all.
Oh, I love that. I think that's great advice, great anecdotes. Oh, I just loved hearing about the rain gauge. It gave me all the feels.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely amazing, Natasha. Thank you so much for coming and talking with us today on the podcast. And we look forward to catching up with you again in the future, I'd say. So we love to see everything that's going on. I will link Natasha's socials in the show notes below. So thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next time here on the farm.